'Tis strange but true, for truth is always strange, stranger than fiction. Often attributed to Mark Twain, it seems that uh, the first observance of truth being stranger than fiction comes to us from Lord Byron, and that plays right into what it is that I want to talk about today. Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Ford, and we're here for another poetry discussion, which will appear in two separate playlists here on the channel. Number one being the poetry discussion playlist, now over 750 videos strong, and number two being the Emily Dickinson playlist, now creeping towards 250 discussions of Emily Dickinson, the greatest poet of all time. And that's probably where I need to start a little bit of mea culpa with this poem. I've talked about this poem on the channel a handful of times. I'm too close to the text. I'm too close to Emily Dickinson's poetry. I try too hard to be too specific about certain things in Emily Dickinson's poems, and I happened across a reading of this kind of by not really paying attention to what I was reading. And because of that, I took a different approach to this poem than ever I had. And it's because Emily Dickinson is a poet. I don't think of Emily Dickinson in that way. When I think of Emily Dickinson, I think of the poetry, of course. But I don't think of it the same way I think of Robert Frost's poetry. I don't think of it the same way that I think of Charles Bukowski's poetry. Both poets that I enjoy very much, but their poetry to me is poetry. Emily Dickinson, to me, is more spiritual than that. Emily Dickinson, to me, is more philosophic than that. And that has forced me into or hardened me against other readings of I Dwell in Possibility. So I want to read the poem first and then go into exactly what it is that I mean here. I dwell in possibility, a fairer house than prose, more numerous of windows, superior for doors, of chambers as the cedars, impregnable of eye, and for an everlasting roof the gambrels of the sky. Of visitors the fairest, for occupation this, the spreading wide my narrow hands to gather paradise. Because I don't read Emily Dickinson as poetry, I read it as philosophy, I read it as spirituality, I read it as whatever it is that you want to call it. It never struck me before. But this opening statement here, Emily Dickinson, some of the greatest opening lines, opening couplets in all of literature. I dwell in possibility. Okay, yeah, I get that. A fairer house than prose. Now, at this opening couplet, you have to ask yourself to disambiguate fair. Fair can mean attractive. Fair can mean not imbalanced. Fair can mean balanced, right? But we immediately get the answer by our speaker going into the appearance of the house. Now, because I was too close to the text, I never asked, was possibility a metaphor? I had always read this text as, I live in the real world, which is prettier than fiction. There's a different reading to be had there. Emily Dickinson, in my opinion, the greatest poet of all time. So it's ironic that I don't really read her poetry as poetry. For possibility to be a metaphor itself, it would be a metaphor for poetry. I dwell in poetry. When we get to the end here, Of visitors the fairest, for occupation this, the spreading wide my narrow hands to gather paradise. Well, that sounds like you're talking about writing, doesn't it? I have the fairest visitors. I have perhaps readers, perhaps the visitors are the other writers influencing her. For occupation this, the spreading wide my narrow hands to gather paradise. Well, that sounds like a metaphor for writing if ever I've heard one, if ever I've read one. So, what are we talking about in this poem, The Fairer House Than Prose? Well, we have more numerous windows. What are windows? Ways to look at things. Really. That's what a window is. It's a way to look out at something else, somewhere else. If you are living in poetry and looking through the windows, you are using these different filters through which you can see things, the same things, in different ways because you've got different filters on. Prose, perhaps, is less readily used for filtering. Superior doors. What are doors? Doors can be closed or open. Doors are used to shut off. Emily Dickinson's poetry, I would not say it is quote unquote shut off, but certainly there is division between Emily Dickinson's poetry and the poetry of others. That door closed, you get to be in your office, you get to be in your headspace writing that poetry to allow that poetry to be different from the rest of the world, something that perhaps prose does not readily account for. Then I want to talk about the everlasting roof. What is a roof? A roof, depending on how Midwestern you are. Well, it's shelter. It is another form of division between this and that. It is a shelter from the limiting confines of prose. To live in reality, perhaps that is prose, versus possibility, which is poetry. And then that final stanza there. For occupation, this, the spreading wide my narrow hands to gather paradise. This is a calling out from a recessed poet, someone who has cut themselves off from the world, someone who has closed those windows, shut those doors, gathered that roof, that everlasting roof, to shelter from the burdensome quarrels of reality, that being prose. Is this poem using a metaphor for the modalities of life, for the way that people view the world itself, the paradigm that people adopt? If you are of a poetic paradigm, you say you are of possibility. If you are of a limited paradigm, you say you are of prose. It is striking that Emily Dickinson, who wrote so much, never branched out into prose, never wrote a short story. She considered publication the auction of the mind of man. Was there something, too, that was degrading about prose? It's a strange way to look at the world, but if you're not going to your poets for strange ways to look at the world, why are you going to them? That is all I have for this video. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. If you find yourself here by chance but not design, consider hitting the subscribe button to stick around for more poetry in the future. There's poetry every Monday, and as always, I hope to have you back for the next one.